Welcome to the Notes to My Legal Self, AI Insights, where law and AI collide. Get ready to level up your legal game with us. We've got career advice, cutting-edge developments, mind-blowing legal tech, and more. Know someone making waves in the legal AI world? Nominate them, or even nominate yourself. We love courageous souls. And don't forget, we want to hear from you too. Ask questions, drop comments. Let's build a community of legal superheroes. But here's the deal. We're all about to have a blast. AI may be serious, but we're here to make it fun. So buckle up, get ready to power up, and let's embark on this exciting journey together. Now, let's introduce your fearless host, Olga Mack. Get ready to dive into the awesomeness of Notes to My Legal Self, AI Insights. Let's go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. I am Olga Mack, and I have Kassi Burns with me, who is effectively becoming my co-host. And we don't do introductions because chances are you met us somewhere in the hallways of LinkedIn. And instead, we do the fire drill questions, just so that you get the side of us that is not disclosed on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. And sometimes my dog may jump in and say hello from time to time. So pre-warning you all now.
By the way, I adopted a cat.
Oh, Jason, right?
Jason is my babe.
Now, I'm surprised you didn't change the spelling to Jason instead of the traditional Jason. You may want to consider that, Olga, but if you don't, I get
I'm
it.
a traditional lady. You will be surprised. I've been raised by fairly conservative folks and traditions according to me. So Jason I would have never named my cat. And I don't even think I had a boy Jason in my life in the past, but now I have a very fluffy, loving, gentle, loyal Jason in my life. And he is everything I ever wanted in a boy and more.
Jason, I love the photo that you posted of him. It was just like so sweet. So
it's a good picture of him. It's an all right picture of me.
It's a good one of you.
Oh, yeah, he has this fluffy chest. I just love it. Anyway, I'm a girl in love now, so there we go. Fire drill, legal writing, concise or verbose?
What was that? What were the two options?
Concise or verbose?
I like concise.
I love concise. I love concise. I'm known for one word response or a sentence that leaves an impression. But I often start in a verbose place and chip away things. So concise requires work sometimes, or at least some sort of thought. And I don't always have the time or desire to do that. So 50-50 for me, depending on where I am in life. So briefcase or laptop bag?
Laptop bag. Yeah. I don't know if I've ever owned a briefcase, to be perfectly honest. So it's always laptop bags. How about you?
I'm actually neither. I am known for buying bags I love, the size that I can put like a little infant in. Otherwise known Olga the bag lady. I just love colors and shapes, and laptop bags. Just the range is so small. So I think that's where I am. I do have a briefcase, and it's very colorful. I occasionally use it, but yeah, just normal bags have a massive size.
When do you decide this is a briefcase moment? Is it because it's like a paper-driven meeting, or is it more of a style, like I want to set a briefcase like vibe today?
I generally like to haul as few things as possible. I like to be portable and agile, so to speak. I think anytime you carry things or haul things, it detracts from the person. So as a general rule, I try not to bring a whole lot of things. My choices and the way I show up generally are guided by colors and the message I want to send. But yeah, I don't like hauling anything. In fact, I don't like purses. I really just like to show up with a phone and do my thing and leave. Everything I need to have is on my phone, generally speaking. So what about you?
I think I tend to have a big bag, like you were saying. It's usually I just have like my standby big black bag that is just ready to go anytime I need to travel. And I think this goes to my days of working really long hours and wanting to be prepared for any scenario regarding my health, regarding if I need something to read. I do have a tote bag that'll have my laptop, whatever cords I need, maybe a little lap blanket. Like I like being really prepared.
Maybe a dog or a cat.
Maybe a dog or
The
a cat.
support.
Yeah. But I do appreciate, I get what you mean, but sometimes it's nice just having your phone and like I don't even have a full billfold I like to carry. I just have a card carrier, and that's what I have my driver's license and a few debit cards in. And I like just to have my phone in that and just have that if possible.
Yeah,
And
as a general matter, I do very few meetings, and if I do them, I like to be fully present. There is a reason why I did them, and otherwise, I can just respond later from my office. Let's do legal ethic dilemmas. Are they intriguing or challenging?
Ooh, like for me right now, intriguing because there's a lot of emerging new novel potential legal ethic issues to consider. So, and I don't think it's going away. I think as we continue to deal with generative AI, we see things like AR and XR and VR being more available in devices that are like the humane AI pen. I think that there are going to be more and more challenging legal questions. What about you?
Generally intriguing, especially when it comes to AI. Sometimes, depending on the team, if the team is focused to do the right thing, then I think definitely intriguing, but can become challenging if you are surrounded by people who are more into gaming the system. And then it becomes really frustrating if they're wired incorrectly.
Yeah.
A problem the lawyer cannot solve for them, really. So generally, yeah, intriguing. But yes, I've been in a situation where I was like, yeah, your mama did a bad job, huh?
Yeah.
Can't help you with that one. All right. Legal practice, diverse or specialized?
I like diverse. I feel like that's a benefit of being in e-discovery is even though I'm in a very specific area, I get exposed to a lot of different types of law. And I feel like that's a fun challenge. It keeps my brain engaged. But of course, there's value to specialization. What do you prefer, Olga? I have a guess, but I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I basically think specialization is for ants.
it.
Was that subtle? Was it too subtle? Okay.
Yeah.
It's good sometimes to have a specialist to provide input, and I certainly value opinions of many specialists. Nonetheless, I can't imagine being one. I have so many interests outside of law, so specializing in anything, including law, would be a definition of my punishment. All right, final question. Law firm, collegial or competitive?
I prefer collegial. I'm all about collaborative, and you can find your people in a firm that are like that. And I think you center together. So I've been very fortunate with finding my other collegial people, though I am aware there is a competitive side out there. So what's your take?
I'm generally very collegial, actually. I like to collaborate. I've collaborated on business venture, writing venture, speaking ventures, books. I really enjoy it. I think the natural default for me is to collaborate and make the pie bigger. But if I find myself in a competitive environment, I'm fiercely competitive. If I find myself in zero sum, if you bring this out of me, then yes, you will get yourself a full-blown competitor. Though my default generally is highly collaborative.
Yeah.
And it takes a button pushing to get me to a highly competitive side.
That's how I am. It can happen. It can come out. I am competitive of myself, that do better than the last time you did it. But as far as like other people, I tend to not be. And anytime I get pushed into being like that, I don't like the person I become. So I might let that roll through, but I usually try to get out of that situation because I just don't like being like that. I feel like there's so much better things to be done in the world whenever you can collaborate. There's enough for everybody. So let's work
I generally love increasing the pie,
together.
but I also love winning collectively or individually if you
Mhm.
push me there. All right, let's talk about the EU Act, and our focus is on the banned applications. You want
Mm.
to start with that? What's in the Act?
Yeah, so we still haven't seen the actual language from the provisional agreement, but we do have a FAQ that was released by EU last week. And in that FAQ, there's a lot of good information, and it outlines 4 areas of risk that, depending on where the AI system falls, depends on how it's treated by the EU AI Act. And the top one is unacceptable risk, meaning it's going to be banned except for a few caveats. And then there's high risk, medium risk, and low other type of risk. So today we're talking about the banned unacceptable risk. And I feel like there's some interesting things in that category, and I think there are some things that probably warrant some definition, hopefully, whenever we see the full language. So, one of those is social scoring for public and private purposes. I want to know what the definition of social scoring is, because that could be very broad. So,
That's the part I was rereading, and it didn't help that it talked about social scoring for private and public. So it's like a very broad definition of what it
mhm,
is. Exploring vulnerabilities of individuals or using subliminal techniques. Um,
mhm.
and then some connections to biometrics. I was actually lost in what that means. Subliminal advertising is something we've seen in the 70s.
Yes.
I'm not sure if it's still a thing. I think it's voodoo art, but maybe I'm uneducated about it. So I was really actually, it's interesting that you started with it because I'm not sure what that means. And when I look at something so big and broad and ambiguous, I wonder. I think the worst thing about laws is when they don't provide clarity, really.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, Whether because they're absent or because they put something so confusing that it blows people's mind and it means different things to different people. That basically chills business activities. Yeah, I was reading and rereading and researching what that means. And it got me all the way to 70s. And I was like, whoa, what do you think that means?
The subliminal messages, or the subliminal techniques.
Or like social scoring?
Yeah, social scoring. The one thing I think about is the episode of Black Mirror where people actually did have a social score, and it dictated if you had a good social score, you could live in a certain type of apartment. And
Like a credit score? I mean,
yeah,
those
that was where I went next. What about credit? Is it credit score? I don't know. And I do believe there are some countries that have some level of social scoring, but it's not something that I don't know. I just really want to know what
yeah,
is
maybe it
it.
does mean a little bit more in the context of certain countries in Europe. And I also, every time I see something coming out of Europe, especially like privacy or technology, remember they went through a very traumatic experience of Holocaust.
Mhm.
And I always
Mm,
wonder if that sort of the concern that ranking people based on characteristics that
mm,
they shouldn't be using race, gender, ethnicity, origin. I do believe that a lot of privacy GDPR is based on that. So as I was looking at that social scoring, is that sort of the concerns with that? And if it is, I'm supportive, right? I don't want to go back to eugenics. That is
definitely
not
not.
the world we want to live in. But that's on the one hand. So I think that's where it's rooted a lot of times in Europe. However, I got really lost in that. And
Yeah.
then beside the sort of social scoring, there's a lot of focus on biometrics. That's also sort
Mhm.
of was a big part. What do you make sense of that?
First of all, there is a caveat where there is an exception that's allowed for law enforcement. And even within the law enforcement exception, there are exceptions. It has to fit within certain categories. But I think that it probably, there's just been a lot of scrutiny, I think, on data privacy, of course, as you were mentioning. And I think Biometrics is a big one with facial recognition. There's just been so much attention on facial recognition. And I think knowing that some of these facial recognition softwares were built and trained off of maybe people just scraping things off the internet, they're just running scripts and pulling images down off of publicly available information. I think that may be combined with the potential risk of is it sufficiently trained? We know that there are a lot of examples of facial recognition not doing a good job with certain demographics and the potential downside to that. And even so, even with that, there are allowances for law enforcement to use biometrics. So
let's wait until talking about the exception. I do think, because remember in FTC is also doing this challenge about voice.
Voice cloning.
The voice cloning. I get a feeling that the world is trending in, first of all, we don't understand biometrics very well. We are really worried about it. And it seems to me that the world of privacy and technology with respect to biometrics, meaning your fingerprints, your retina scanning, your voice, your facial like all of those things that are very much who person is, as Olga's hands, like that's very personal. It seems to me where we're trending is in the world where it is sort of very special PII. It's a category, just like children are highly protected. Olga's name and social security is highly protected, but Olga's retina and fingerprints and facial structure, that's like really, and voice cuts into who Olga is and incredibly personal. That combined with not understanding it, I think that's why I think we're going to see more around biometrics, both in privacy and security and various technology. And again, as I was reading it, there's awareness that this is coming, this is big, this is super personal, and yet like we know that it could be used for good, and it really could be used for a ton of bad.
Yeah.
And like when I read that, I read fear.
Yeah, I think it's fear of, we know that the wave of generative AI capabilities via deepfakes or synthetic versions of us, whether authorized or not authorized, it's like the genie's out of the bottle. And how do you get the genie back in the bottle? It's really impossible to do that. But I think it's acknowledging the fact that there is going to be a potential wave of potential for threat actors to really cause a lot of damage to people, defrauding them, maybe blackmailing them, whatever.
Impersonating, because that's already happening, maybe not at scale yet, but there are ways to do it, and there are incidents of that. And you started talking about law enforcement and government use. And as I read that, I read it as a struggle. On the other hand, there's a recognition that you can use it to catch criminals, find somebody who been abducted or lost or whatever. On the other hand, everyone is worried about the big brother government. And again, traumatic history, specifically in Europe, and the concern of tendencies in the United States. That's one of the challenges on the privacy side from Europe with the United States, the surveillance part of it. So when I was reading it, I basically, I felt like I could see the tension, and folks kind of don't know how to cut it, like what the test is. What about you?
Yeah, I found it interesting because a lot of law enforcement have been using things like facial recognition out there. I recently read a book about the development of Clearview, which is a somewhat arguably controversial software company that is a facial recognition software. And it talked a little bit about how a lot of law enforcement, largely focused on the US law enforcement, but there were other law enforcement groups from other countries that were using it. And the potential of it can be great at identifying people, but there's also substantial risk of it misidentifying people, especially of certain demographics. And I think it's like an acknowledgement of there is a potential useful use case there, but I also think that there's a bit of a reckoning of You've maybe been able to use this for a few years now without too much attention. I believe FTC has, or NIST has actually done some research on the facial recognition. And from that, I believe the Department of Homeland Security, they've updated their requirements to use facial recognition software. I think that there's more of a reckoning now where they're being called to there's an expectation that if you use this tool, you have to be able to validate that there's some sort of work being done to minimize risk of bias, because we know that there has been historically algorithmic bias for certain demographics. It's not really great at people with darker skin tones. And that, of course, goes back to it wasn't sufficiently trained on a diverse set of data. That's where my brain went of it's a bit of a reckoning of things.
I can tell you, there are countries where I travel a lot, and there are countries where you enter, they just check your passport, and there are countries where they do your fingerprints, which is okay, fine. But I've now been in the countries where they do my retina scan, and they ask me to pull out my contacts, so it's a really good retina scan.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, and I was like, I don't know, I feel like I'm undressing now.
Yeah. That's a pretty interesting, I would say maybe even slightly aggressive of take your contact out. We want a really good copy of that retina. So
if you go to wealthy Middle Eastern countries, that's a standard now. Basically, you can't enter Dubai without the retina scan.
Interesting.
I can't tell you that much. Well, this is where they're like, ma'am, do you have contact lenses? Because we have a hard time scanning your retina. I'm like, oh, do you? I have a hard time scanning my retina. Let's talk about that. So, but anyway, you can't enter on this. And I don't know. I feel very, that's very personal. You're a little too close, right in my eyes.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's talk about impact of this. My concern when I look at it, and the final is still not ready, but my concern is when I read what's available, I see a lot of ambiguity and lack of clarity. And whether you're a big or a small business, I do think that lack of clarity chills commerce. As someone who advised numerous businesses, it's almost better to have really strict laws, because then you say, this is black and this is white, and here's how big gray is, and here's the way you mitigate it. And with something like what we have now, on one hand, it's a really great first attempt, but it feels like a little too aggressive given that we're in the beginning. And so a lot of people feel uncomfortable. So there's a lot of qualifiers. And I worry about this sort of, on the one hand, on the other hand, on the third hand, wait, we only have two hands. So it gets, that's what I worry about, whether it's a big or small company advising. And I especially, of course, worry about a small and medium, because they will disproportionately bear the cost of it. And I worry about laws that are like not ready to really promulgate laws yet. What about you? What's your concern?
I think for me, my concern is exactly as you said, is there's not enough clarity on those categories, especially those ones we talked about early on. The other one, it's not necessarily a criticism, but just a commentary of one of the last categories is it forbids the scraping of data from public places or CCTV for training. And I don't have a problem with that, but I think it's a signal of there is going to be increased scrutiny on the data that startups and other companies use to train their models on. And we talked about that the last time we had a session where there was data provenance being developed related to data sets for AI models. And I think that's just a sign of that's coming down the pipeline. And I think that's going to be an expected requirement of AI-based companies that are building these AI tools, that you have to have a pretty well credentialed and provenance data set to stand by. I think the old days of you just got it and maybe you hired some random, or you hire like random people from Craigslist to yank it down however they see fit, and you don't worry about the ethics around it. That's just not going to happen.
It's usually somebody in Pakistan or India who is scraping. It's not a guy from from Craigslist. But yes, I think it's even less stringent than the guy from. Let's lower this to, because I think that's what happens. Yeah, I just recently published an article about what I think will be the rise of technology that basically allows us to give consent. I think I agree with provenance and data sourcing completely. And then the two biggest challenges with data off internet, whether you scrape yourself, outsource to a guy on Craigslist, or have an army of folks in Pakistan or India trying to choose your country. I think the two biggest challenges are IP and privacy. All of those are solvable with consent. And today, we finally graduated from very shallow discussion of opt-in or opt-out. Do I check the box or do you check it yourself? Now, most folks require basically opt-in as opposed to opt-out. It's very clear that's where regulations and legislations are trending. That's still, to me, a very low-tech solution. Checking the box is really not a whole lot of tech. It's very manual, just digitized. But you can imagine that every person, every company, provided that they have an inventory of stuff, whether it's private or IP related, that they have a strategy to monetize or control. Forget about monetization, control. I think control is the most important thing, and you can monetize after that. And I think we will have a rise of technology that essentially helps you deal with those, with inventorying and control yourself, your assets, who you are. And I definitely think that based on the app, that has to happen. I think it has to be more than provenance. I think the provenance, you as a company say, yes, we're ethical and we have a chain of custody of yeses. But you need technology to help to do it at scale. And I think we're definitely going to see the sort of permission technology rise of it definitely coming. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and I think that even if things are challenging now, how do you grapple with X scenario? I think that technology is going to help us solve those problems. I recently skimmed through an article that talked about machine unlearning. How do you remove data points and the impact of those data points from an LLM? If someone says, I want to be forgotten from this LLM, do you have to blow up that whole LLM and retraining it from scratch? There's probably a better way to do it. So that's something that some people are trying to figure out. How can we make the tech more agile where we can account for this, where like you feed it in and then it's the black box and then we have no control over it and then boom, we got to recreate it. We're going to have mechanisms in place to account for those scenarios because regulation is requiring it.
Yeah. Remember, we have had the right to be forgotten in GDPR for a while. And I don't believe we have a great solution for that. If you ever advise technologists on, I don't know if you ever had a conversation with technology, hey, can we delete this stuff? It depends what you mean by deleting. Oh, tell me more. And then they give you like a deep dive, what it means to break the data and whether it leaves or dies. And I'm like, okay, that's great. There's all these things, but have we forgotten this person?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on what you mean. So I don't think to me, that's a flavor of, I'm learning conversation is very much parallels the right to be forgotten. I think it's actually even a more challenging question than sourcing and provenance and permissions.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think I'm learning from models and technology, this deletion part has many shades of gray that, at least based on my education and conversation with numerous technologists for the last 20 years, I've never been able to get, Olga, we've now deleted this person completely and utterly, no trace.
And I think on the flip side of that, I also think we maybe have too high expectations if we think people really know where all that data is and where all the data points exist within that data, having been on just even data breach sides of dealing with corporate data. So I think that there's that challenge, of course, but I do think it's something that we'll have to consider and try to work around, and how much of that is actually going to be a truly impactful solution, or if it's a bit of a bell and whistle. I don't know, but I do think those are things we're going to have to think about. Now, I have a question for you, Olga. Do you, I know I have a certain feeling on this topic.
Okay, yeah, feeling good.
Do you think that the LLMs that we're using now broadly, having used just whatever was scraped off the internet without much thought to provenance, without much thought necessarily to bias or anything, do you think these are going to be the dinosaurs of LLMs, in that in the next years we're going to want LLMs that are rebuilt based off of better data systems, better, maybe more transparency? Or do you think the cat's out of the bag and there's no scaling it back, even if we say we're finding better solutions that's going to replace that, and so no one's really going to use that?
It's a really good question. I'm actually going to reframe it because I have another law.com article that is coming out on this very topic, but not very topic, but very similar topic. I think the rise of general, sort of very all-encompassing LLMs is really exciting, but it is as exciting. This is actually interesting because we just talked about specialists or generalists. Really, you need both. On any team, you need somebody who has like a bigger vision and kind of understands her gaps and brings in specialists, and then helps the specialists see a bigger picture. And then the two both are valuable, provided that they're respectful, can disagree, and get to the truth together. So general LLMs trained on basically all of the internet without permissions is exciting. You can get very generic answers and high level answers. But then if you ever try to get depths with ChatGPT, it's actually highly unsatisfying. It at some point just basically iterates on the same information over and over again. And it doesn't really give you depth. It gives you breadth and gives you unrelated stuff, increasingly bad answers. Actually, the longer you talk to it, the worse the answer becomes. So that gets me to what I think will be happening is that I think we'll see a lot of small models building around really teeny tiny problems, going in depth. And the solution to any problem, commercial problem or social problem, will be a bouquet of small LLMs that actually can give you depth. I don't think breadth is enough to problem solve. Breadth is enough to general education and kind of understand directionally, like south or west or north. But if you want to go 37 degrees north, southwest, or whatever, you need to have specialized models trained on really high quality data sets with hopefully permissions and all that. And you really need to have breadth. An ideal team, but whether it's humans or LLMs, includes both the breadth and the depth. That's how you win. You win with depth. So I do think that we'll see the rise of teeny tiny models that essentially get you a lot of depth. And any solution to a social or business challenge will be basically assembling them together, making sure they work together correctly, weigh the outcomes, and give you the output. So I think both are important. And I do think the business value is going to be in building small models that really go deep. That's my view on things. So what about you?
I agree. I agree with you. I feel like the tools we're working with now are going just to be sandboxes for us just to figure out how to use it, but it's not going to be a valuable resource for work product. I think that they'll end up getting replaced with superior versions, probably by the companies who originally created them. Next gen versions where they're going to be able to say, we can validate, we can confer that all of the data that was used to train this has got XYZ provenance. And maybe they'll eventually sunset these, or maybe not. But I think the outputs, and maybe what we'll end up finding if we start using generative AI, we'll start disclosing which models we use, which tools we use, and there is a certain value that gets associated with it. If you use old school GPT 3.5 or 4, maybe in 5 years, that'll seem very antiquated. It will be like me pulling the encyclopedia off of I remember as a child pulling that off the bookshelf whenever you had a full encyclopedia, a book of encyclopedias, it's going to be less relevant. And I just think the technology is going to advance so quickly that they're better off. They may decide, and this is me just completely guessing, but it may be more worthwhile just to rebuild it from scratch and being able to say, hey, we're releasing it and the data has this provenance, and maybe that solves some problems or addresses some regulatory concerns over time. So that's what I predict, because I do think there's just so much attention on data provenance to AI models that I think that's just going to be the way it happens. So we'll see. We'll see.
I have a memory. I spent a lot of my times in the summer with my aunt who was teaching math in high school. She collected two things. She collected leather-bound books, so she had a lot of encyclopedias, and she collected revolvers. A very eccentric lady. And it was all displayed in her living room, guns and books. Yeah, she was a very special lady. So anyway, every time somebody tells me about the encyclopedia and pulling up a big books, and I'm like, yeah. And I felt like the guns were watching.
You better use that encyclopedia correctly or there'll be consequences, Olga. So.
All right. Okay. Maybe a final question about her. What is the impact on the average Olga consumer? What do you think the impact of the act of sort of banned and maybe restricted and all kinds of other things? What is the impact of all of that on the consumer?
I think for the consumer, it means ideally as you mentioned before, biometric information is so highly focused on, especially in the unapproved, unacceptable risk. I think that maybe people will start realizing the value of that data. And when they start seeing that information can't be collected anymore, except for in certain circumstances, maybe consumers will be more aware in other circumstances where it may be collected. Again, the big question mark, what do they mean by social scoring? I don't really know what that means unless it's something about cookie-based advertising. I don't know. I think that most of this really affects, I think, potentially threat actors or developers of data when it comes to scraping and things like that. So I feel like the unacceptable risk may not be as apparent to the regular consumer as maybe the high risk or mid risk, which we'll get in our next call or next session, other than maybe just an awareness of the potential of Gen AI potentially defrauding you, mimicking you, creating synthetic versions of you. What do you think?
It's interesting. What I'm seeing is actually, as I said, ambiguous, and I have a lot of concerns. But if I step aside and look at what this does in the eyes of an average Jane or Olga or whatever Joe, whatever your average is based on your location, how about that? Because the average will change on the location. I am average in some places, believe it or not. I think when you have an act called AI Act, I think it sends a very clear signal to an average Olga that this is not a fad. That this is here to stay. This is important technology, important to regulate. This is not a hype. This is a thing. So I think that's first and foremost what it does. Whether it does it actually protects consumers is the second thing. But I did definitely think that what it does, it says it is important technology. It is here to stay. You consumers should pay attention. And you cannot just dismiss it as a hype, as a beanie baby, so to say. I think that's number one. And number two, they struggle with ethics quite a lot, but nonetheless, the overarching theme, especially with the ban category that is so strongly defined and so specific and includes various categories, there is a very clear message that we are worried the impact about this technology. Ethics is important. More to come. We are worried. You should be worried, and you should be careful. Those, to me, I think we're going to see a whole lot more versions, many more versions with AI Act than we had seen with GDPR. This will become more granular with more T's, probably even with criminal implications and the whole 9 yards. as we learn more, to me, those are the two biggest messages for businesses and consumers, is that yes, it's a thing, and yes, doing the right thing is important, and you will be judged if you don't. Those are the things that are pretty clear to me. But yes, I am worried about ambiguity, which I think will be solved over time, and hopefully through legislations as opposed to through enforcement, because that's a more challenging thing. Anyway, Kathy, great conversation. Completely enjoyed it.
Yeah.
In the new year, we have a part 2 of this, talking about other parts of AI Act. And with all of that in mind, everyone have a good time. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Happy New Year.
And that brings us to the end of another thrilling episode on the Notes to My Legal Self AI Insights. We had a fantastic time exploring the fascinating intersection of law and AI with you. But hold on tight, because the adventure doesn't stop here. Stay connected with us on social media to continue the conversation, share your thoughts, and be part of our incredible community of legal enthusiasts. Together, we can inspire, learn, and make a real impact on the world of law and AI. If you enjoyed today's episode, we encourage you to share it with your friends, colleagues, and anyone else who could benefit from the exciting insights we discussed. Let's spread the knowledge and enthusiasm far and wide.